Well, happy anniversary, Central Worship Center, 50 years. I don't know that our founding fathers in the early 70s, when they began to feel a move of God and the need to start a new ministry, I don't know that they really looked into 2022 thinking of 50 years. But I want you to take a walk with me as I just share some things about our history, and as we celebrate our history, but yet really look forward to the future. Well, again, I just want to refer back as we talk about our church and the history. Although Central Worship Center / Epworth Fellowship Church is 50 years old, our beginning actually started, as you can see by this sign, in 1890 when Benjamin Elliott and his wife Sarah Ann, they donated this property here where this graveyard is, right down the road from where our church is now. They donated this in 1890, and they began to build what was then known as the Epworth Methodist Episcopal Church. Later on down the line, of course, the Episcopal Church and Methodist Church, they separated and went their own ways. But over my shoulder here is where the original church and the community center that sat, which we'll see in just a few moments, that is now at the Marvel Museum. But you know, the church, when it was decided by the conference to build, people in the community got really excited about the opportunity to see a church here in the area of Sycamore that we now call Central Worship Center. But in this founding was something that I believe that God in his heart and in his wisdom, that God wanted to move in the lives of people in this community. And so this was kind of our founding and our beginning. I remember as a little boy coming to this community, to this area, to this church. And it's where I kind of teethed on the ministry and the things of God. Right across the road here was the old Sycamore schoolhouse that was destroyed by fire in the 1950s. But the community developed and people came together and they built this building that now is over at Marvel Museum, which we're going to go see now. Well, here I am standing in front of the old Epworth Methodist Episcopal Church, founded in 1890. Off to the side here was the community house. And so if someone got married in the church and they wanted to have a reception, they just went right to the community house. It was also where all the church dinners took place, any Christmas luncheon or whatever, everything took place there. And of course, the sanctuary, which was built in 1890, became a testament of really God's faithfulness. And the amazing part about it is that as people came together in a rural farming community, they decided that they wanted to see God do something special in Sycamore. And so as this church was being started and actually being built to be launched as a ministry lighthouse to the community, I found out years ago that my great-grandfather, whose name was John Dukes, who was a farmer that lived in the area, that he was so interested in this that he actually started coming out and helping as they began to frame up and they began to build this church. After the church was built and dedicated and they started to have weekly meetings and Sunday morning services, my great-grandfather came into church one Sunday morning and he gave his heart to the Lord. And his life was changed, his life was transformed, and it all happened inside this building here. So here we are inside of the old Epworth United Methodist Church. And honestly, this is just about how I remember it as a child. When I was born, my parents brought me here. And so I grew up into this church until I was 8 years old. And then that's when, in 1972, Epworth Fellowship, now Central Worship Center, was started. I remember coming in that back door, and after you would come in through the little foyer, or just a few steps in, there was a metal grate about 4 foot by 4 foot in the middle of the floor. And I remember walking in the winter, and it would be cold, and I would stand there over top of that metal grate because it was the heating system, and the heat would blow up. And I remember it blowing in my pant legs after coming in from the cold, and just remembering that warm feeling of coming into church. But it was here where I went to Sunday school, and it was here where we were taught, and it's here where I really started and began in my spiritual foundation. As I look at this this building, this altar is the same old altar that was here when I was a child. It probably has been here for many, many decades. And there is this little rail that would hold the communion cups for people as they would come to church and as they would receive communion. And so this was really a special place. The windows are still the same with a rainbowed stained glass. And I've got a lot of fond memories from this building. And because I guess spiritually I kind of teethed on this place. But there's one memory in particular that I think in a lot of ways it became the formation for my spiritual journey. I don't quite know why, but as a little boy, I was sitting maybe with some friends on the front seat of the pew. I don't believe it was probably these exact pews, but it was a front pew, and I was sitting on, and I remember that one particular morning after Sunday school, we had church, and as I was, only as maybe a 6 or 7-year-old could pay attention, I was watching the pastor as he preached, and after he got done preaching, he had an altar call. And I watched in my mind as people began to come to the altar. And I don't know if it was a regular occurrence, but there was something happening in the spirit realm in the early 70s. We had the charismatic renewal movement, you had the Jesus movement, but there was really just a sovereign move of God. People were coming to Christ. And so I sat there as a little boy and I watched as grown adults, they went to this altar and they knelt down. And as they knelt down, they were praying. They were crying out to God. And just as a child, I didn't really understand it. But there was something that happened that triggered a memory in my mind as I watched as one lady raised her hand. And I'd never seen anyone ever raise their hands in the church before. And as she raised her hand, I remember her hand began to tremble. I didn't know theologically, I didn't understand what that meant. But something came over me as I watched this as a 6 or 7-year-old child. And this thing came to my heart. This must be the presence of God. And it has been a theme in my life that I've recognized over the years. And so I just wanted, as we tell the story and the history of the 50 years of Epworth Fellowship Church that came out of this building here, now we know as Central Worship Center, I just want to share with you a little bit of the story, and I wanted you to be able to see what I experienced as a child, but yet what I believe that children can still experience today, and that is the presence of God. So today this building has been moved. It's actually, you can visit and even tour the building at Marvel Museum, where we are in Georgetown. And the church was moved several years later after the new church was started and leaving the conference and becoming an independent church. But I just wanted you to walk this journey and to see part of our history. Although Central Worship Center is 50 years old, we actually got our start in 1890. And it's amazing to see what God has done, but yet what He'll continue to do in the future.